Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called Justice, written by ProvisionalRebel. We do things a little differently out here. The human leaned back in his office chair, giving a dismissive wave around the room. Inspector Clark squirmed uncomfortably in the chair provided to him. Yes, Governor, I saw as much when I was waiting for this meeting. I was sent here to perform inquiries into whether your government was meeting federal standards as to the issue of piracy. The governor leaned forward on his desk, frowning and jabbing a finger towards the window. I'd say that you know damn well that we're taking it seriously, but resources are much too slim to be gallivanting around the sector looking for a couple strays when I have a colony to run and protect. Clark unconsciously darted his eyes towards the window, then quickly back to the governor to avoid staring at the display that he assumed had been prepared for him. Yes, but that must have been a single ship. The system borders the Thayan trade route, which lies outside of the United Earth territory and therefore is beyond my jurisdiction. The inspector flushed hotly for a moment. Yes, Governor, but this is the closest starport with sufficient repair facilities to maintain a human vessel. If the pirates are operating in this region, and they must poke their head up to breathe here. The governor leaned back, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment. Clark suddenly felt his skin crawl, like he felt the eyes of a predator sizing him up. Finally, the human broke the moment with a smile so false that it had to be intentional. Inspector Clark, you are more than welcome to visit the starport and sift through transponder logs to your heart's content. But all you're going to find is honest traders doing honest work. I have a single dedicated naval vessel in this system, and they spend every moment they're not in port handling the situation. If the Thayans can't handle a couple of pirate ships, it doesn't speak well of them, not me. Now, I have a meeting with the agricultural department, so if that will be all. Clark paused for a moment before standing, deciding if there was anything actually worthwhile to ask. Then he sighed, knowing that there was hardly a reason to come here in the first place. I have no further questions. I will send a copy of my report to your office when I have compiled it. You obviously have met federal standards pending a review of your transponder logs. The governor nodded for a moment before standing and walking him to the door. A pleasure as always, and please, while you're here, take in the sights. The inspector took a deep breath before stepping out into the fading daylight. He stopped a moment, letting his eyes stray up slowly over the macabre scene. 9 humans, all dead, hanging from the large tree in front of the governor's office. Each had a sign fixed to their chest which simply read, Pirate. But he knew the truth. There was a reason they were singled out in a lawless system like this. There was also a reason their faces weren't covered. He hesitated a moment before looking to their bluish-purple faces with their bulging dead eyes. There was a real reason, their real crimes carved into their foreheads for everyone to see. Slaver. Story number 2, Before We Had Houses, written by TheCurserHasntMoved. Rusty was worried. An uncommon state of affairs for Rusty, but then again, it was unusual for anything this bad to happen on the homestead. Things were going okay. Or as okay as they can go in an emergency up until just before sundown. The emergency was that a pup had gone missing, and the master and the wise cousin were called to help in the searching. The cub was one of the large bird-thing peoples, and they had some shed feathers for Rusty and his wise cousin to catch the scent from. The wise cousin, a friend and near packmate, could smell almost as well as Rusty, but he was far too large to move nimbly in the woods where the cub had gone missing. To be fair, neither could the master, nor could the master smell as well, but that's why Rusty was there to help him. Besides, the master had stronger magics than the wise cousin. Even so, the strong magics of the master were not perfect, and there were many perils in the woods. The master had driven off the great stompers with his death magics, for those were loud. But there were greater peril. Some evil had assailed the master with its own foul magics, a thing of light and flashing which blasted a chunk of stone into the master's side. The evil was like to the master. It stood upon two legs and held in its hands a thing to work its death magics. Yet its skin was wrong, its scent was wrong, and it grew horns from its knees and elbows, a misshapen mockery of the form of the Master. But the Master was not looking for evil, and neither was Rusty. The Master and wise cousin brought their own death magic to bear upon the evil and drove the thing away, but the thing was not killed. Still, the bird thing cub was missing even with the evil stalking the woods, and so Rusty had to keep searching for her scent. Rusty trusted the Master and his friend and near packmate, so he only kept his ears alert to danger, for he could hear things the Master could not, just as the Master could hear things that he could not. Because of this trust, Rusty soon picked up the trail of the missing cub, and less than a minute later found her huddled in a hollow of a burned-out stump. Rusty gave the cub bird thing, his person, many kisses, for he was happy to have done his job so well. And he positively wiggled under the praise and pets of the Master and the wise cousin. Rusty knew that he was a good boy, but it was still nice to hear the Master say so. The Master didn't sound right, though. He was breathing too heavily, and Rusty noticed for the first time that he was bleeding far too much for just getting hit by a rock. The Master's clothing about his belly was dark with blood, and without missing a bird thing person to find, Rusty could smell it cooling on the breeze. This was bad. The Master was injured almost as badly as when the Master's great roller had rolled over him and crushed his hind leg. However, Rusty knew that the Master knew those with very powerful healing magics. For one such had made the hurt stop and given Rusty a new leg, even if it had to be taken back off again from time to time, and so this is how Rusty knew that the Master could live even with such a wound. The Master had spoken many words, and the cub bird thing person, and the wise cousin too, and the wise cousin took the cub thing bird person away, probably back to their pack, while Rusty and the Master began to walk back towards the homestead in the darkness. Rusty didn't like splitting up the pack, but the Master was very wise and powerful, so he probably knew best. But even still, Rusty couldn't make his heckles go down. The Master was agitated too. He looked around as he slowly shuffled from tree to tree. He kept his death magics close to his chest, and he spoke little and sang not at all. Rusty was sure the evil was at hand. "Whoa, boy," the Master panted. "I need a second." Rusty looked with concern at the Master as he slumped against the tree and slid down to the ground and muttered, "Just a little rest, boy. Be a good boy and stick close." Rusty did not understand most of these words, but he knew the Master needed to rest. Rusty was a very good boy and curled up in the Master's lap to guard his rest, panting and fitful as he was. Rusty had no magics, but he had his voice and he had his teeth, and those were enough to make the field beasts go to where the Master wanted, and they would have been enough. The chill of night sank its fangs into Rusty and the Master as the stars above turned with the dragging hours of darkness, and they shivered against it together. The Master was still slumbering when Rusty heard rustling in the dark. It was a subtle noise, but Rusty knew its source. The evil had returned. Rusty leapt from Master's lap and growled at the darkness. He could hear that the evil had not moved, and he could smell its foulness just beyond sight. He bared his teeth at it, but it only came closer and closer and closer, until Rusty could see its looming, mocking shape looming over him and the Master. Its eyes shined in the starlight, and Rusty bayed fiercely at it. It seemed to Rusty that it glanced at him and dismissed him as easily before taking a loping stride towards where the Master slept. It was infuriating. Rusty charged and sank its fangs into the evil's calf and shook his body with all of his might. The evil bellowed in pain and jerked his leg, flinging Rusty away. However, Rusty once again interdicted himself between the evil snarling and barking. The evil made a noise that Rusty could only interpret as sneering and kicked out at him. Rusty did not flinch. Rusty was a good boy, and even though it hurt, he still tried to bite at the evil as its boot connected with his chest. But he was too small. Rusty was flung through the air and into a tree, and the yelp of pain passed through his lips. The evil stopped over to where Rusty lay whimpering, raised his death magic device, shouting words Rusty couldn't understand. Why do humans keep these creatures? So weak, so useless, it could have been better to let them go extinct. That... The Master had stirred. The Master had heard. The Master was angry. Rusty had never seen the Master so angry as he flung himself at the evil without even his own death magics. There was a terrible tumble of limbs and blood, and Rusty could only lay in the dirt and fallen leaves whimpering as the Master gained mastery over the evil with only his hands. Rusty is a good boy, he screamed as he wrapped his hands around the evil's throat. We had dogs before we had houses, you fuck. Even though Rusty didn't know that the Master was saying, he knew the Master was more angry than he'd ever been. The evil spluttered wordlessly as he flailed and kicked against the Master uselessly until it lay still, and the Master froze in rictus of fury. Rusty stayed with the Master until morning, when the wise cousin came to took Rusty away. Rusty did not want to leave the Master. Rusty could not understand that the Master was gone forever. Until the end of Rusty's 20 years, he returned to the place he saw Master last and found it empty. End of story. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Bushmaster 177, Henry the Red, Caspar Arnholtz, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Elijah Silvercross, Dragzoon WRE, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.